Please pray with me. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts always be acceptable to you, our strength, our rock, and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. For I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. The former things shall not be remembered or come to mind. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and delight in my people. No more shall the sound of weeping be heard in it, or the cry of distress. These are the words from the prophet Isaiah that began our readings this morning. These are beautiful, hopeful words, words of promise. In fact, the whole passage from Isaiah is full of happy images. My favorite is the image of the wolf and the lamb feeding together and the lion eating straw like the ox. Because I've always kind of liked the idea that the animals won't have to hunt each other anymore and everybody's going to get along really well. You've probably seen pictures of this on Christmas cards. And our responsive reading from Isaiah continues the theme of promise and hope. Surely it is God who saves me. I will trust in him and not be afraid. For the Lord is my stronghold and my sure defense, and he will be my Savior. And on that day you shall say, give thanks to the Lord and call upon his name. Make his deeds known among the peoples. See that they remember his name is exalted. Beautiful, beautiful words of hope. Well, to be honest, on Wednesday morning, I did not wake up with hope. As the day went on, it got worse as I read of the fears and concerns that my friends who are gay or Latino or Muslim or Jewish were confessing on social media. This was no simple disappointment about the other candidate winning. These were real expressions of fear for their personal safety. Fears which have been borne out around the country since then. Muslim women who have had their hijabs ripped from their heads. In Detroit, African Americans who have been walking the streets in their neighborhood and told to go home, you expletive. This is Trump's America now. And a gay priest in Iowa who found a note on his windshield that says things I can't repeat in church. It seems as though hatred has been unleashed in all its fury, and it's scary and ugly. And this is not America at its best. We have spent the last year talking about the two great commandments Jesus gave us. Love God with every part of our being and love our neighbors, all our neighbors. The words and actions of the last few days have felt like a slap in the face. Where is that beautiful hope of a new heaven and a new earth? Now when a good friend of mine has been spat upon and pelted with rocks. Where is the assurance for a little 6-year-old Latino boy who is afraid he's going to be deported? How do we explain hatred and prejudice to children? But this I know and am confident about. Despite everything we see around us, the hope of God's kingdom is still real and present. God is still Lord and King, and Jesus waits with open arms to gather us all into his kingdom. And this is very, very good news indeed. This is the new heaven and new earth that Isaiah prophesies. It's all good, very good, but it's just not here yet, which has been painfully obvious this week. In some ways, nothing has changed. The hatred and violence were there before, but more hidden behind facades and masks that prevented us from seeing the depths of the problem. Our gospel reading is clear. Before the new heaven and new earth can be seen and Jesus can come again, terrible things are going to happen. Wars and insurrections, terrible earthquakes, famines, plagues, dreadful portents, and great signs from heaven. Well, we've seen our share of these portents and signs recently. Last month, central Italy was rocked with 2 major earthquakes, coming right on the heel of the August earthquake, which killed over 500 people, injured well over 1,000, and left Italy facing over $1 billion worth of damages. A little closer to home, we remember Hurricane Matthew plowing into Haiti this last September, taking over 1,600 lives and leaving some 10,000 people homeless. We remember all too well the Ebola crisis in Africa just 2 years ago. And people have been persecuted for their faith since Jesus walked the earth, not unlike the actions we've seen resulting from the hate speech we've heard during this presidential campaign. While these are all akin to the signs Jesus tells us to look for, the problem is that people have been experiencing these kinds of signs for generations. Nothing is really new. Jesus still hasn't come back. So what are we to do? The answer is simple, but it's not easy. We are to go on loving. We are to go on following Jesus. That might mean we have to take a stand against injustice and persecution. We may need to speak up and not be silent so that we might protect those we love, and sometimes even those we don't. For whatever reason, Jesus thought it best to leave the care of this world and her people in our hands. So we must be serious about it. Bear with me while I read you a letter received by a friend of mine on Wednesday. Please know that as I read this, I'm not trying to make a statement about one candidate over another. We do have to move on from where we are in what we have now. It's not about politics. Now it's about love. See, on Wednesday morning when I was having trouble even getting out of bed, I remembered that I'm ordained to be a representative for God to the people. If I'm having trouble, what about my brothers and sisters? Where do I get my strength from? What can I do? So I asked my friends who might have been experiencing the same sadness and fear to join me at a coffee shop that night. Seemed simple. If some came, we might be able to talk, and if no one came, I'd have a cup of my favorite coffee. Win-win situation for me. Well, my friends came, and we talked, and we cried for the future that seems a little unclear right now. So one friend read this letter that he had received from a colleague at another college. Dear friends, with the exception of my level of education, I fit the Trump demographic. Older, white, male, and born that way. Heterosexual, at least culturally Christian. And people like me have just elected a proudly anti-intellectual candidate with none of the skills in experience or in temperament to handle the most difficult and important job in the world. The overwhelming majority of the people I care about most, my students past and present, my colleagues, my friends, are female or LGBTQ or African American or Latino or Native American or Muslim or Jewish, or a member through some other happenstance of birth of yet another group our president-elect has already derided and is now empowered to attack further. So here is my pledge. I will continue to brace you all, those who share a demographic profile with me and those who do not. This promise is intended figuratively, but you may interpret it literally if you need or want to do so. I will stand with you and in front of you if need be. If I can use my privilege to protect you, I will. I am no knight in shining armor, and I make no guarantees about my success, but I vow that I will spare no effort. Most importantly, I will love. I will seek the truth as a scholar and as a citizen, and I will speak that truth as a professor, as an artist, and as a person. I will not lower my voice. I will make art, and I will love. This professor that I've never met who wrote this letter, and who admits that he isn't even really a practicing Christian, has figured out that he is called to love. how much more us? Loving might mean taking a stand to protect a friend or colleague, or maybe someone we don't even know yet. Loving might mean speaking out when our own personal safety might be at stake. Loving can be risky and painful, and yet we are called to love. After Jesus tells us all the signs that will accompany the coming of God's kingdom, he makes it pretty personal. It's not an easy gospel to read this morning. He said, "But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify." Are you ready to testify? Am I? To bear witness to Jesus and the gospel? Now, we may have visited other churches where the members of the congregation get up and share what God is doing in their lives. It's usually called a time of witness or a time of testifying. Usually, it's giving praise for things that have worked out. Blessings for new grandchildren or new jobs, reports of restored health, safe travel, etc. Not many get up and say, "Isn't it great that I'm suffering? Isn't God good? Can't you see God's hand in this?" But testifying to God's power and goodness in the midst of suffering is exactly what Jesus says we will be called to do. Proclaiming the hope that is in us, even in difficult situations, death, betrayal, loss, pain, is our mission as followers of Jesus. Testifying for the sake of another's safety is our responsibility as Christians. The letter my friend shared is one way of bearing witness. He committed himself to being an ally for those whose voices are not often heard. He committed himself to come alongside and stand with his friends and colleagues. Regardless of the candidate for whom you voted, this is what we promise when we reaffirm our baptismal covenant, like we did last week. We promise to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves, and to strive for justice and peace for all people, and respect the dignity of every human being. It's easy to say those words in the comfort of St. Michael's. We know each other here. No one is expecting anything heroic. But it's much tougher to know that we might be called to act on those words, maybe in some grand, noticeable way that could make the evening news, or maybe just in the quiet faithfulness of a life lived with God despite pain and sorrow, like Thomas Dorsey did, a songwriter. Mr. Dorsey was a songwriter and gospel and blues musician who lived in rural Georgia right around the turn of the 20th century. Trying to support his young family, Dorsey split his time between playing in clubs and playing in church. In August 1912, Dorsey left his pregnant wife in Chicago while he traveled to St. Louis to lead a large revival meeting. He was the featured soloist for that week's revival. After the first meeting, he received a call that his wife had died in childbirth. The next day, he received news that his infant son had died as well. After the funeral, Dorsey withdrew in sorrow and pain, refusing to compose or perform for many, many years. Then one day, he sat at the piano, and a feeling of unexpected peace washed over him. He began to pick out the notes that he heard in his heart, and the song, "Precious Lord," was written. And since then, thousands of people have been blessed by the words of this song that he wrote through his pain and suffering. He was able to let God speak through him, despite what he was feeling. As we face these challenging days ahead, may we let God fill us with grace and courage to do our part to proclaim the coming kingdom of God to others through our words and actions. Let us let the words of Thomas Dorsey's lovely song be our prayer, that we would know God's presence and life-giving strength and courage. So you have Leave Us next to you. Let us sing together. Precious Lord, page 106 in Leave Us.